The topic of gay marriage is in the limelight at the moment, and I think it's only a matter of time before we start seeing the same old rabid, frothing at the mouth Bible thumpers warning everybody about how unnatural it is to be gay, and how God made Adam and Eve, and he didn't make Adam and Steve, and then we can all be really impressed at how clever they are because they managed to get it to rhyme. And then there'll be a counter-argument from people who say that there's evidence of homosexual activity in the animal kingdom, and therefore it must be natural, and so on and so forth. Now, personally, I'm not convinced by the argument that just because we see same-sex coupling taking place in the animal kingdom, that it automatically means that it's natural for human beings. Human beings find it natural to speak, and not many other species do. There are plenty of species who, if they're given half a chance, will quite happily eat their young, and again, that's not something which is natural behaviour for human beings. Now, I'm not actually saying that I think homosexuality for humans is unnatural. Quite the reverse. I think that it is a natural part of who we are. I just think we need to be careful how we put forward the argument, and that pointing out analogous behaviour in the animal kingdom is not a particularly robust argument. So what I'd like to do is take a slightly different approach, because I think it's possible that we can show there are potentially sound reasons why homosexuality in adult humans would have been beneficial to our ancestors. To do this, ironically, I need to start with human reproduction, which is something that most homosexuals don't get up to very often if they're given the choice. And the gist of it is this. Human offspring are born with very big heads, and they are completely helpless when they're born. And this fragility of newborns makes us unusual in the animal kingdom. Not unique, but unusual. Many animals, most animals in fact, tend to be quite a bit tougher when they first arrive in the world. So a consequence of this large head is that human females have to have reached a certain size before they can give birth to their first child and stand a reasonable chance of surviving. So this sets a minimum age for reproduction. The complete helplessness of human offspring and the long time that it takes for us to reach maturity, the point at which we can reproduce, means that the parents have to live for a substantial amount of time after giving birth, or the child would perish before it reaches this minimum reproductive age. So quite atypically for most animals, this period of parenting is measured in many years, quite often in way in excess of 10. And for the whole of this time that the parents spend raising their children to the point whereby they can reproduce themselves, they're still fertile and they manage to continue reproducing. Now, if we do some really, really rough maths here and say that we'll take a female and say that she can produce one new offspring every 2 years, and that she has a total reproductive fertile period of 30 years, and of those offspring 50% of them survive. That means that in her lifetime she'll produce 7 surviving offspring. So that is an increase in population by a factor of 3.5 if you assume that the parents are a couple. Now that could quickly put a severe strain on available resources, especially prior to the agricultural revolution, where we didn't grow our food, we had to go out and find it. So population growth of that order is clearly not sustainable for a hunter-gatherer society. So having adults around who don't breed but still contribute by doing the hunting and the gathering would be beneficial to the family group. In addition, because of the size of a baby's head, human childbirth is actually an extremely risky process for both the mother and for the child. And childbirth was a major cause of death in females prior to the medical advances in the 20th century. So here again, having related adults around who can care for a child but don't necessarily have one of their own and therefore don't have different priorities, that's going to improve the likelihood of survival of any orphaned children. So far from being a bad thing for society, homosexuality in a social animal like human beings actually makes perfect sense. And it isn't just about population control. What it's about is improving the chance of passing on our genetic material. And really that's all that any organism is. It's just a vessel to pass on genetic information. So from this perspective, by looking after orphaned children, making sure that they in turn reach a reproductive age, homosexuality makes evolutionary sense as well. And the early figures that I used in my example to show an exploding population were a bit rough and a bit flawed, I'll admit. They missed out a whole load of significant factors that will bring that down a bit. Things like the premature death of females and the child during childbirth. I think an infant mortality rate of 50% is probably a bit on the low side for most of humanity's history as well. So, whilst having additional protectors and providers around is going to be worthwhile enough for it to be a natural process, and we've got to make sure that there are enough homosexual people around to be of benefit in terms of the contribution they can make, and there've got to be enough of them that they can find a compatible mate, because we're social creatures and we like sex. It's got to be low enough that it doesn't adversely affect the overall fertility of the group. There has to be this balance. There's got to be a sweet spot somewhere of how many people you would expect to be gay. Now, if you're working on any kind of project, it makes sense to whack in about, say, 5 to 10% contingency. That's like a good factor to pad things out by in terms of either time or materials or both. And oddly enough, if we look at the rates of homosexuality in human beings, 5 to 10% is roughly what we see. So, okay, it's not proof. But I think that that's based on sounder reasoning than just because God said so. I'll see you later.